She's passionate about telling stories of amazing women who are rocking the world and empowering women to live, love, and thrive. Here's your host, Katherine Gray.
Hi, welcome to Live, Love, Thrive, Women's Empowerment Hour, brought to you by 360karma.com. My amazing guests today include the internationally renowned scholar Gail Dines, who created the organization called Culture Reframed, which focuses on how porn impacts young people. And then later in the show, we're going to be speaking with Rabbin, who is a cancer survivor. He also is an author and a globally known speaker. So we'll be talking to Robert later. But first up, please give a warm welcome to Gail Dines. Hi, Gail. How are you?
Good. A pleasant to meet you.
Yeah, good to have you in from Boston.
Yes, I'm happy to be
Although
here.
I know that's not a Boston accent.
No, it's an English accent, as you can well tell, yes.
Right. So you were born in England?
I was born in England, lived in England till I was 21, then moved to Israel for 7 years.
Right.
We lived in Israel for 7 years, and then my husband was offered a job for a year 30 years ago. So we came for a year 30 years ago, and here we are, still in Boston.
Oh, my gosh.
Yes,
right.
yeah.
So you... at what age did you head over to Israel? I know you were like 20 or something?
21, yeah.
21.
Straight after our first degree, we went to Israel to live, and then we joined the peace movement in Israel, and things were not exactly...
It was the 60s, right?
No, it was late. Oh, no. Do I look that
No,
old to you? I was going to say...
I was thinking you said you grew up in the 60s. You must have been as a kid.
No, I went older now.
Yeah.
It was actually around the 80s, and things were sort of starting to turn. We joined the peace movement, and things were difficult. It was a difficult time in Israel. My husband was in the army. That was difficult.
Oh, wow.
I had a 10-month-old alone in Israel with my husband in Lebanon.
Oh, my
so
gosh.
it was a very stressful period.
Wow.
And then when he came out of the army, he was offered a position with the company he was with in Israel for a year, as I say.
Right.
He then changed his profession. He went to the Harvard Business School and got a doctorate, and now he's a professor as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you told me you grew up in like a middle-class Jewish family in England. And then, but it was really moving to Israel that was really life-changing for you, right?
Well, I think if you want to ask what was life-changing for me, and it would have been anywhere in the world, it was discovering feminism.
Right.
Was the life-changing.
But that happened in Israel?
Well, that actually happened at university in England when I was doing my degree.
In England?
Yes. And
I know you heard a speaker that
that was in Israel,
you.
yeah. That was kind of the second level. But the first level was really sitting in a cafe in London reading a book by Andrea Dworkin. And it's like my life kind of... I was like, couldn't believe what I was reading, because suddenly everything made sense, you know, and everything went click, 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 click. This is why, you know, this is how your life, and this is what you've been looking for your entire life, and you didn't realize it. And I was then, I think, 19.
Wow.
And then when I went to Israel, I worked at the Rape Crisis Center. I was also doing research, and I was writing my dissertation for my doctorate.
Now, that epiphany that you had in England when you read that book, did that have anything to do with you going to Israel?
No,
no,
it was completely separate. Yeah, that was going to Israel was more.
Yeah, what drew you there?
Well, what drew us there was, you know, I was brought up post Second World War Europe into, I would say, when looking back, a sort of a community of people with trauma, because it sort of began to realise what Hitler had done to the Jews. And we were taught not to trust non-Jewish people. And we lived in a very close Jewish enclave.
Oh.
And there was a lot of anti-Semitism.
Right.
I mean,
this was in
England.
And what part of England was
Manchester.
that? Oh, in Manchester.
I remember many times, you know, the kids dancing around me calling me Jewish pig in elementary school.
Oh, my gosh.
And then a really profound story was, I belonged to the Jewish Society at university, and there was about 8 of us Jewish students went out to a pub in Leeds, and I don't know how the people around knew we were Jewish, but all of a sudden the pub spontaneously starts singing "We Can Smell Gas." And it was like, you know, now you are like a student, 18, and everyone around you is suddenly singing that. And it was, and that was just one of many stories. So we decided, I met my husband young, we were 18.
So you decided Israel might be a more
hospitable place,
welcoming place, obviously.
And we went there, and it was, in many ways, you know, I sort of came of age as a feminist, as an activist, as a scholar in Israel. And I started my first feminist movement in Israel at 22 in my living room.
Wow.
Called Isha La Isha, which means woman to woman, which still exists. And now I hear they even have a building and everything.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
And
so
you
it really
started
took
that.
off. And then
Wow.
I became a research assistant for someone working at the University of Haifa. And I was writing my own doctorate. And then somebody mentioned that there was a feminist anti-porn slideshow. Do I want to go and see it from the United States? And I thought,
Now,
why not?
At the time, you're working for the Rape Crisis
Yes.
Center, and you get invited to hear this speaker talk about
Pornography.
pornography.
From a
Okay.
feminist
Because I know this
perspective.
was like your second epiphany or
That's right.
life-changing.
That's right. And I
know,
go,
moment.
and I could not believe what I was seeing. I couldn't believe the level of violence in the images.
Right.
It was just stunning. And I was like 22, and I'd had quite a sheltered life, and I just couldn't believe it. And I thought, A, how do men make this? And B, how do other men find it arousing?
Right.
And that night, that changed my entire trajectory of my life. I went home and I called my dissertation advisor and I said, I'm changing my dissertation. I'm focusing on pornography. And I think I wrote the first ever PhD on the sociology of pornography in England 30 odd
Wow.
years ago. And I used kind of, at the time, what was called critical cultural studies, which was coming out from Marx and French Marxists and Italian Marxists were developing these theories, and I applied those to a study of pornography, saying, you know, if people argue that under capitalism you need to legitimize why you oppress working class people, then why can't we argue the same thing about patriarchy, that in fact pornography is the tool by which we legitimize the oppression of women in
Wow.
patriarchy? So I applied that theory,
Yeah.
and I did the case study of pornography.
And so that's been your life work.
Absolutely.
And
And I say it got me. It got me.
Right.
It found me.
Right.
And
It was your purpose
Absolutely.
to shed some light on this and
absolutely. I think
research
yeah.
it. And
It was just, and also to be an activist. It wasn't just
Right.
that. I mean,
Right.
And I was lucky enough when I came to the United States and I was writing my doctorate to get a job at Wheelock College, which is a small college in Boston, whose mission is very unusual. The mission is actually to improve the lives of children and their families.
Right.
And I got this job, and they were very, very supportive in the early years and really helped me become a kind of thought leader and public intellectual. I got tenure very easily at an early age, and the college was very supportive.
And you're currently a professor there?
I am,
at,
yes.
Wheelock College.
Yes, and chair of the American Studies Department as well.
Wow, and you love that?
Yes, but I'm also now moving into the non-profit world as well.
Right.
So
and that's with Culture Reframed.
That's Culture Reframed.
Now, when did you create that entity?
Well, that's got a history. So that started first around 2007 because what was happening was that I was going, and I've been on the lecture circuit since I first got here, going to universities, and I would talk about pornography and its impact. And this was pre-internet, so
Right,
you've got to realize
right.
we're not even talking about anything.
It's only gotten more rampant
You-
since.
so
Yeah, we're
much
gonna
worse.
talk about that. Yeah.
And I was going around, and I was realizing I was kind of traumatizing people because I was talking about, I was showing the porn, not too much, but just even a small amount, and
Right.
the impact. And then when the internet hit in 2000, and I had to sort of revamp my slideshow, and had to start looking at what was mainstream porn, and
Right.
and you know, this is not your father's Playboy, believe me.
Right.
I was going around lecturing, and I was finding that people just didn't know what to do with themselves,
Right.
literally, afterwards. So we started an organisation in 2007 called Stop Porn Culture, which was a particularly activist, feminist-based organisation. And then what happened was we weren't getting that much traction. And in 2012, after my book Pornland came up, I was invited by the Icelandic government to go to Iceland by the Minister of the Interior. And I was set up to meet 5 different ministers, like Education Minister, Health Minister, Minister for Gender Equality, if you can imagine. Yeah, that was my response. Wow.
Yeah.
And as I'm on the plane, I'm thinking, you know, how am I going to sort of build a narrative that pulls together all these people?
Right.
And what became clear was public health. Because the beauty of public health is that it brings to the table people who normally would not sit and speak to each other.
Right.
And so when I went to Iceland and spent 5 days going, you know, speaking at the government and at Reykjavik University, when I came back, I sat down with people from Stop Porn Culture, a lot of medical people, and thought we're going to rebrand ourselves as a public health organisation, and we're going to move into looking at pornography from a public health perspective. So we pull together, again, people who normally would not sit down at the table, anti-violence experts, paediatricians, gynecologists, youth workers, parents. And we said, well, what do we really need? What is missing? And it was very clear to me, after lecturing all over, was that, and I'll give you an example of a particular thing that really, for me, was a game changer. So I'd just gone to a very well-respected hospital to give a talk to doctors. And it was mainly women. And there was about 250 women in there. And they all came in at 9 a.m. as professionals. By 9:15, they were all mothers. Couldn't get them back to being. So I thought,
because
okay.
my first thought, to me as a person that's not involved in that world, is that I probably don't know very much about it. And what you're saying is, I would think that porn is not in their everyday life,
That's
these
right.
female doctors. So I can imagine the shock of you exposing this to them.
When they've got 10-year-old, 11-year-old kids
Right.
at home and 16-year-olds
Right.
who they've never spoken to
Right.
about
So,
them.
in other words, as mothers, and our listeners out there who are mothers, probably aren't aware of these statistics you and I are going to talk about that
Yeah.
are just unbelievable. Probably weren't aware of what the content is, about how it is typically so destructive toward women.
And the boys who use it. I mean, that's the other thing
and
that we
that's the
need
other
to
part
talk
of
about it.
Your studies, yeah.
So I think the first shocking statistic that is that the average age of first viewing porn is 11 for boys.
For boys,
And that is, you put porn into Google, and the only way really today you get it is through Google going into the free porn sites. And when I say that you get catapulted into a world of sexual violence and degradation, I mean, I can't really explain, obviously, on the radio what it is, but we
Right.
are talking about almost torture. And this is mainstream. I don't go to the torture porn. I
Right.
go to the mainstream porn. I follow the breadcrumbs of an 11-year-old boy with no credit card.
Right.
And what he comes to within 15 seconds, probably 10, because I get to it in 15 seconds, so he
Yeah.
probably gets to it in 10,
Yeah.
is, I think, this 11-year-old boy is thinking maybe he'll see a pair of breasts, maybe
Yeah.
he'll see sex.
Right.
What he gets catapulted into is a world of sexual degradation, humiliation, and torture.
Right.
And we know, for example, from studies, peer-reviewed academic studies, that 90% of the most watched porn scenes have physical, sexual, and or verbal violence against the woman. So we have actually
Right. So
got
we're
studies on
teaching
that.
our young men not to respect women
Well,
from these.
We're doing a
Yeah.
lot more than that, actually.
And I was just going to say, and I didn't even know this, but you said a third of all the downloads is porn.
Yeah, and porn sites get
That's-
more
that's
hits than Netflix,
astronomical.
Amazon, from Netflix and Amazon combined, and Twitter combined each month.
Wow.
So what's interesting about
Shocking.
this 11-year-old boy is when he puts porn into Google, think about what he thinks he's going to see. He thinks he's going to see breasts or whatever. He does not expect to be
Right.
catapulted into it.
Into the
And so I
darkness.
began to think, what happens, because I'm the mother of a son, and
Yeah.
now my son is older, but I was thinking, what would happen if at 11 he put porn into Google and saw a woman, being kind of slapped, spat upon, choked, hit by 3 different men, which is standard porn. And then I thought, what would happen is these boys go, because they're aroused, normal developmental level, your hormones are, going crazy. And then he is pulled into a world that he did not want to get pulled into. They're very smart in pornography. They say things like, are you man enough for this? Now, what 11-year-old is going to say no? So they pull him in. And then you think of this 11-year-old boy who thought he was going to see breasts. And here he is watching sexual torture. And the pornographers are saying, we know you like this and this is what you want. So in his stomach is a toxic stew of arousal, shame, fear, humiliation, all those things. But of course, he's not talking to anyone about it.
Right.
And he's aroused. So he thinks, indeed, this is what he wants. So
Right.
what the pornography industry is doing is laying a trap, much like a spider lays one for a fly, and pulling him in. And then what we know about trauma, and I think these boys are being traumatized by the violence they're watching. What we know when you look at the trauma literature is if you are traumatized and you do not resolve that trauma, then you keep going back to the point at which you were traumatized, which is going to be the point.
And this causes an addiction.
That's exactly right. You see, what you're doing is you're building into the business model of pornography, porn addiction, because the trauma that he's living with, he's going back again and again and again. And then not all boys will become addicted, of course. You know, there's certain preventive factors that, like good parenting, can often help. But what we know now is that there's a level of addiction of young boys that therapists don't know how to deal with because they're not trained in it. We know that I get phone calls all the time from parents asking for help. And basically the medical profession is 10 to 15 years behind this. The therapeutic profession is as well. And I only know this because when I travel around the country, all the stories I hear. And eventually, you know, they're called anecdotes, but anecdotes eventually cohere into data when you're hearing the same story. Whether I'm in Australia, I'm in Germany, I'm in Poland.
It's around the world.
Doesn't matter. I get the same story.
And so your mission with Culture Reframed is to educate mothers and parents alike that that this exists and how it's impacting their children and to be aware of it.
Yes, well, we thought, what are we going to do about this? So we have to build resilience and resistance in kids to pornography. So in the public health world, how do you build resilience and resistance in kids? You build knowledge skills in parents and health professionals. Your parents are always your first line of defense. So what we realized, and I realized, is the parents can't help their kids because they, A, don't know what's in porn, and B, don't know their kids are using porn. So what we're building is our first project is a parents program. We're actually building it out now, and it's about to go up in the spring. And we're building a whole education program for parents, which will be made up of short videos and PowerPoints, downloads. We're going to have a kind of cafeteria-style program.
So you're going to educate parents on what to do.
Well, first of all, A, what's in porn. B, how to have the conversations. Because how do you even open it up with your 12-year-old? Do you think your average 12-year-old boy wants to sit down and talk about porn with you? So we're going to have examples of best practices for conversations. We're also going to explain to parents what is happening to the boy, because now there is incredible science coming out of research looking at how pornography reshapes the adolescent boy's brain.
And so this is also to so that they can talk to their child without creating any shame in their child.
Absolutely. The kid is shamed enough. You don't want to add to that.
I mean, it's a, uncomfortable conversation to talk about sex with your 10 or 11-year-old kid.
And pornography is even worse.
Exactly. Add to that.
That's right.
I would think, I just want to roll back to your talking to those women doctors that you said were mortified at what they saw and heard.
Crazed, actually,
Crazed, okay. What about a group of male doctors? What kind of reaction do they give to you? Because I'm so interested to see the juxtaposition.
Okay, so I'm going to generalize here, which means that I'm not speaking about every single one. Just a group. You tend to get more pushback from men.
I would think.
And one of the reasons, if some of them have their own history with pornography, that's actually quite a large reason. Another one is, I think they themselves, when they were growing up, and they feel their shame, and that often gets in the way. And one of the big problems we found, and we're going to address this on our parents program, is a lot of the mothers are scared to bring this up at home to the husbands or partners because they don't want to know if he's using pornography. So they say to me, if I talk to my kids, does this mean I have to talk to my husband first? And if I do, I'm scared what I'm going to find out. So we're also going to build a unit around how do you have a conversation between the parents around pornography. Because you really have to be honest about that, because the kid will pick up any sense of disagreement between the parents. So they've got to be on the same page.
And does it always happen with the parents? Because there are many homes where parents are not that, stand up to even address this with their children. So what other forms do these children have? Is it teachers? Is it therapists? Is it?
That's a great question. Great question.
their friends' parents. I don't know.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I'll tell you, they have one, and this is, again, what we're going to do is keep building out our programs for teachers,
Yeah.
and especially for pediatricians.
I would think teachers and pediatricians.
And youth workers and
Right.
therapists.
Yeah.
So
I
the
think
goal
you have
is
to expand beyond
I
the
completely
parents. 'Cause
agree with you.
let's face it, there's some parents who just really
No,
don't care.
no, we know.
Yeah.
We know that.
And
And
sadly to say. Yeah.
we know that absolutely from tons
Right.
of research, that a lot of kids actually are their parents' parent, parenting their
Right.
own parent.
Right.
So, yes, so the goal is to actually build out so that we get to all people involved in a kid's life, which is the public health model, right? So we're just beginning
Yes.
with parents, but
Right.
once we build capacity in terms of both funding, so if there's anyone out there who is interested in helping to us develop, we would be thrilled to get in contact with you,
Right.
because as a non-profit, one of the big issues of non-profit, of course, is
the
getting
funding.
is finding money.
Right. So if people really care about this study and making this difference in our culture with these young people, then they have to get behind you so you can sustain the work.
And a lot of foundations have. I have to say, we have been funded by some great foundations, but in the non-profit world, to be honest with you, there's never enough money.
Right.
There's never enough.
Right.
So and especially as we're going to be a web-based program with videos, that's an expensive program.
Right.
So,
But it sounds like a really important one.
well, we're the only group.
Right.
In the world doing this. Can you
Wow.
believe this? There is
Right.
no
I
other
think
group
it's because
dedicated to
most
this.
people would say that they think that porn is not detrimental to a young boy. I think they think it's just a normal thing.
Well, let me say,
But I say that with them not knowing
Knowing what's going
about the content. And that's why what you're doing is really important. Because if you just say porn, you probably think,
yeah.
my husband's kids grew
Yeah,
up with it, and now our kids are going to, and it's just the way it is. Young boys like porn. And I would think this would be a normal way that people look at it. And it's so interesting, the perspective that you're putting on it to educate people about how detrimental it is and what the content is that they're probably not aware. Like you said, it's not your grandfather's, penthouse.
Well, it's also, I want to say one thing, that it's even more than that. It is shaping the sexuality and reshaping the sexuality of boys all over the Western world. It is the major form of sex education today.
And the reason that's so important, what you're doing, is because here we are trying to garner women's equality. There's this big women's empowerment movement. That's the show, right? And so that's really going to impede our empowerment of women to not have young men being raised to respect women. And I see that as one of the biggest
Absolutely. And not only
obstacles
not respect,
that's occurring.
what studies show is that the more porn boys watch at an earlier age, the less capacity they have for empathy and intimacy.
Wow.
And those are the two key things you need to build healthy adult relationships.
Right.
And those are and healthy adult relationships are the core of a sustainable society.
Right.
So this is why it's a public health issue. This is not about this one boy watching pornography.
Right.
This is about the very nature of the culture
Right.
that we are going to end up living in. And I can tell you, anyone who does this research and knows how it's impacting boys, we fear for the next generation of boys
Right.
and what the culture is going to look like, because
Right.
these boys are going to become adult men. They're going to partner. They're probably going to become parents. What kind of parents are they going to be when they've lost the capacity for
Right.
empathy and intimacy?
And we already have this very patriarchal society, as we
Well
can
said.
see what's going on right now. And in order to shift that to more balance, what you're doing is so important and crucial. It really amazes me that you're the only entity out there doing it. I mean, that's quite a big boulder
agree.
to lift.
I
Yeah.
agree, but you know what?
But thank
That's
goodness
what you
you're
do.
doing it.
But that's
Yeah.
what you do. Think of every major movement that pushed boulders uphill that changed lives. The civil rights movement,
Right.
the feminist movement, the labor movement. You push boulders up hills to make the world livable.
Right.
Without us women, who
Right.
have been the ones, let's be honest,
Right.
to push the boulders up those hills,
Right.
Could you imagine what this world would look like if you took us out of the
Right.
picture? We're the ones who do it.
Do you have representatives all over the country?
Yes.
You do?
Yeah, of course,
that's
all over
great.
the world, actually. We've got groups in Norway, in England as well. Yes, we have
that's
that.
great.
Yeah, we're
That's
building
great.
up and out and internationally.
Right. So if people feel that this is something really important to them and that they'd like to know more about it, they can obviously go to culturereframed.org.
Exactly.
And learn more about it. And that's how they could get involved. They can support it financially, or I'm sure you need more hands, more feet
Whatever
on the
they
ground.
can bring.
And whatever city they're located in, that they could help expand
Absolutely.
your organization and the knowledge, and I guess get this into, like you said, doctors, schools, therapists, teachers.
We're building a movement, not just
Yes,
an
you are.
organisation. And that's so everybody out there, if you're listening, it's Culture Reframed, like reframing a picture, ed on the end.org. You can contact us through there. We would be thrilled to have anyone who would like to support us, because we are building a movement. Because what we're doing is we're standing up to the pornographers and we are saying, not on our watch are you going to hijack our children's sexuality.
Wow. Thank you for sharing this. I know you've enlightened me, and I hope you've enlightened a lot of viewers. And thank you so much.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you for the
you
work
so
you're
much.
doing.
It was a pleasure. Thank
You're
you.
an amazing woman, Gail.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will be right back with Robert Rabbin.
The Live, Love, Thrive radio show is produced by 360karma.com. Are you a 360 Karma woman? If so, spread the word. Be sure to follow us on social media at 360 Karma Women on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please like us and share us with family and friends. This is the year of the woman, and we are stronger together. The Live, Love, Thrive program is brought to you in part by Honda of downtown Los Angeles, supporting the equality and empowerment of women.
And we are back with Robert Rabbin. Hi, Robert. How
Hello,
are
Catherine.
you?
Good. Excellent. Thank you.
Good. Well, first of all, you're a cancer survivor. You're an author, and you're a globally known speaker. And I am
That's
so
a
happy.
little generous, but I don't want to argue with you
Well,
on
you
that.
have spoken all over the world, and
Yes, I have.
I
Thank you.
find you to be a very humble, very
Thank you.
humble guy, So, I mean, I was reading your book, Speak Truthfully, and I like the way you set it up, because it's about people that you've helped learn to speak and their stories.
Yes.
I mean, their stories are amazing.
Yes.
I know one was a prostitute that turned her life around. Now she's a speaker. Another gentleman shared that he had a lot of catastrophic things in his life, but one of them was being
leadership expert.
he was diagnosed with HIV.
Yep.
And so each of these people are people that you have helped overcome their fear of speaking, and are now speaking in different capacities.
Yes.
And you tell their stories in your book, Speak Truthfully, which
Yes.
I think is awesome.
Thanks.
And what I want to do is share with the audience your amazing journey. So,
It's been a rather long
yeah.
one. What part of it should we
like my
focus
last
on?
guest, you grew up in Europe, in Italy, right?
I did, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
How interesting is that? You were born in Italy?
No, one of my sisters, I was born in New York.
Ah, but you grew up in Italy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then I know you were telling me, it's really fascinating, because you were telling me, really at 11 years old, you had this kind of spiritual epiphany, which is really young.
It is
Yeah.
young.
And-
It was in Italy. We had gone skiing in Sestriere, which is the Matterhorn, and I broke my leg. And at that time, you got put in a cast from your hip down to your
Right.
ankle, and I was in bed for a month. And with my siblings off to school and I had nothing else to do, I started going through the encyclopedia that we had,
Wow.
page after page after page. And
As long as you weren't reading the phone book.
no, it wasn't the phone. Well, I didn't read everything, but I was
Right.
just really curious, and suddenly this
Yeah.
overwhelming amount of information
Right.
started to fill in my mind. And anyway, one day, through the window of my bedroom, I felt and saw this light pour in.
Wow.
And in that encounter, some questions started to form. which were, who am I? What is real? What's my purpose? I don't know.
And it's
I
so
don't know
funny
how
about some
that
people don't
happened.
get those questions till they're like 50 or 60.
Well,
Like at 11 years old, for you to be thinking that, it's quite amazing.
Courtesy of I wasn't thinking of it. It just kind of came
Yeah,
to me, courtesy
yeah.
of the broken leg, and that pretty much set the course of my life to
Wow.
pursue those questions, finding answers, which led me when I was early 20s to India, where I met my meditation master with whom I spent 10 years. And so my whole, I guess if we're looking for a signature from my life journey, it would be the pursuit of those questions, the cultivation of the awareness from which I could generate those answers.
I noticed that you spent 10 years in India and you studied Vedanta, which I recently had a couple on
I saw their
who has the
show.
Vedanta Institute
Yes.
here in LA. And I had never heard of it before. I understand it's an ancient Indian philosophy.
It's one of the 6 philosophical systems of India.
Wow.
It's in what's called the non-dual tradition. So I studied that and Kashmir Shaivism and Kundalini Yoga and so on. But basically, I was there to meditate and focus inward. And so I did that for 10 years because I wasn't a very good student. If I were, I probably could have gotten it sooner and been on my way, but nonetheless,
So what possessed you to go to India? What age were you when you traveled to India?
I was 23.
23. That's really young. I guess it's because you had this spiritual epiphany at such a young age.
It just,
Yeah.
those questions really took root, I have
Yeah.
to say. And
Wait, what did your parents think when you left for India and then you lived there for 10 years? What was your relationship with them?
it was always, well, my father had died the year before I got to India. I had been living in Europe for a couple of years anyway. My mother was always supportive, but I have to say, from the time I graduated high school, I was pretty much on my own journey, and it was very easy for me to let go of anything that I didn't feel was significant or supportive of wherever it is that I was. I lived in Israel for a year. I lived in Europe for 2 years. I traveled overland to India where I lived. So I was...
You were kind of a vagabond.
I was kind of a vagabond, a spiritual hippie vagabond. This was,
That's cool.
back in the day when it was cool.
Yeah.
And but even that whole...
Were you trying to find yourself and find those questions
I
of
was.
who am I? Why am I
was.
here?
Where is my place?
Yeah.
What is my purpose? Exactly.
That seems to draw a lot of people to India specifically, when they're
Well, I
looking
can't
for
say
that.
now because I'm a little out of touch, but it certainly did for me. Now, just to be fair to my story, I wasn't there. I didn't go to India specifically to look for a guru, which I ended up finding. I went on a mountaineering expedition. Myself and some friends were intending to sneak over the Himalayas. Right? We were going. This is how bright we were. We were going to sneak over the Himalayas into Bhutan. The small Himalayan kingdom, which at that time you couldn't get into. And we were going to go to Bhutan and track snow leopards. We wanted to go and live with snow leopards. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of what I was up to at the time.
Okay.
We never made it. I ended up meeting this teacher and thought I would spend a couple days in the ashram and ended up spending 10 years.
10 years. What
But-
was that like living in an ashram for 10 years? I would take it's like very zen, very peaceful. You don't have all the
No.
distractions of the outside world. No?
It's not, well, it wasn't a Zen monastery, so it wasn't Zen-like. It wasn't that peaceful. We were doing a lot of meditation, but my teacher, whose name was Swami Muktananda, was...
A very common name. Just kidding.
Yeah, very common name. That's right. I named all my kids after him. So, he was what is called in that tradition a Shaktipat guru, which means he would awaken people's kundalinis. And
Sounds dirty. No, just kidding.
it wasn't dirty. I just need a moment to process. I've never heard anyone say. It wasn't dirty, but it was extremely energetic and powerful.
Right.
And so the predominant experience that I had over the 10 years was, yes, a lot of inner peace through meditation, but the overall experience was one of tremendous energy and all kinds of things happening through that awakened spiritual energy. So it was, you said, what is it like?
Yeah.
It really is unlike anything I have ever experienced anywhere else. So it's just kind of live TV. You would have had to have been there
Right.
when it was happening.
Well, I mean, so you don't work while you're there, but you work in the, is it like
Work in the community,
in
that's
the
right.
community.
Because
wow, what an interesting life.
It ended up being a very large international educational nonprofit organization. I became a manager and then later became a vice president. So I was
of the ashram.
of the foundation. We had 30 ashrams and 500 centers.
Oh
and
my gosh! Wow.
became a very, very big thing. So I was traveling around working at various managerial capacities.
Were you speaking then?
Was I speaking? Not in the way I did subsequently. I would speak with staff and so on, but what I was learning without knowing it was leadership and management skills that I later used
Right.
when I became a leadership consultant.
Yeah, it's always interesting, isn't it, when you do different things in life and you always
And
find
then-
that, oh, that's why I did that,
Yes.
because I was going to need it for
That's
the
right.
next thing. Yeah.
Listening to my teacher speak
Yeah.
is where, again, without consciously learning this or knowing
Mm-hmm.
that I was being prepared for what the work I would do later, he had an extraordinary speaking style that had a lot to do with where he spoke from, because he was talking about meditation and inwardness and embodied that.
And that's where you learned about speaking
Without-
truthfully.
It's where I learned some of the fundamental tenets. So when I did leave the ashram at 35 years of age and started my work, I became a leadership consultant, organizational coach, and started out my speaking career as a meditation kind of fellow. So in those contexts, it was really important for me to speak with awareness, since we're talking about awareness. Important to speak with a sense of connection to myself and others.
Being
and so on.
present.
Being totally present and so on. So I would do that. Then when I started speaking on stages and to business groups and conferences and so on, keynoting, then I began to extend my awareness of speaking more to certainly how do we create content, but also what they call delivery skills. In other words, when you're on stage or in front of a room, you have what I call the speaking instrument, which is the means through which you communicate your message. The speaking instrument is verbal and nonverbal, is of course what we say, but it's how we say it.
Right.
The use of our posture, our movement, our gestures, our facial expressions, the rate of our speaking. If I start really speaking fast like this, so it's like, typing, you get, which people do, you can't understand. So I began to study all the different aspects of it. The foundation being to speak with presence and awareness in connection, which is connecting to yourself, connecting to the other.
And this is what you've taken to your teaching of speaking.
This is how it happened.
Yeah.
When I had moved to Australia in
Right.
2005, I was giving a meditation course, and a woman came up after and said, "Robert, can you teach me to speak the way you speak?"
And I love your story about Australia, because you'd travel all over, you were speaking all over, and you went to Australia, you went home packed and went back to Australia to live. You went to visit and you
I did.
decided to live, kind of like you did with India.
I did.
think you have a habit going there.
I know.
And so you had
Yes.
no idea what you were going to be doing in Australia, and you no more got there, and you told me someone walked up to you and said, "Hey, could you teach me how to speak
Well,
like
that's it.
you?"
That's it. I had been
Yeah.
invited to Australia. I was living in San
Opened up a
Francisco.
whole new
had been invited to
world.
Australia to give keynotes at a couple conferences. Fine, I'll go down for 2 weeks,
Yeah,
give my talks, get paid, come back.
right.
When I was there, another epiphany. I'm a little bit
Yeah.
susceptible, apparently,
Yeah,
to epiphanies.
epiphany kind of guy.
An epiphany kind of a guy. And I just said, I belong to this place. So
Right.
came back and
Felt
as you
at
said,
home there.
more than at home, like I was I was a tree whose roots were in that land. And I
Yeah.
just said, I've got to come back. came back to San Francisco, packed up, got a one-way ticket back to Australia, no visa, no plan,
Yeah.
not really any money to back that kind of a move, and I just went there. And while I was sorting everything out, this woman came up and said, "Can you teach me to speak the way you do?"
Right.
And I said, "Well, let me see." So I made some notes. I kind of deconstructed my speaking style, gave her a coaching session.
Right.
She called me, I think, 2 or 3 days later and said, "Robert, there's 5 people who want you to do a workshop." And that was that.
That
and
was
I've been
off and
teaching
running,
this full time ever since.
And you said it was mostly women.
The
Yeah.
public programs that I did in Australia were 75 to 80% women.
Right.
It was flipped when I would work in organizations. There were more predominantly men. But the public ones were mostly women, and most of my
women
coaching
business owners and
some
housewives and
across the
nonprofit
gamut, but
and-
there were a lot of healers, people working in women's empowerment movement,
yeah.
holistic healers, coaches, people like that, some
Right.
entrepreneurs, some business people.
Yeah, I was talking to someone, a guest earlier this year, and she teaches women how to speak publicly.
Okay.
And the conversation was how important it is to the future of our equality that women be able to speak publicly. And it's one of the most people's greatest fears is speaking publicly. But women especially are fearful of it and need to be doing it if we're going to move our women's empowerment movement forward.
Yeah.
And so whether they're a business owner or a speaker or an author or whatever, like for instance TED Talks, only about 15% of them are women. Means 85% of them are not.
Yeah.
And so how do we get more women speaking? And that's why I love what you're doing. And I remember asking you, why is it that a woman would want to work with a man as opposed to a woman? Being a women's empowerment person, I wanted to understand that. And I loved your answer that, first of all, knowing that a man has their back.
I do.
And second of all, that you know the male perspective, so when they go talk to all those people that run the corporations or the ones that they're dealing with, you are letting them know how to speak to a male perspective.
I think that happened accidentally.
Yeah.
In other words, if they had issues that were gender-based, for example, one of the students worked in a government entity, government agency.
Right.
It was male-dominated, older guys. She was, by her own admission, as a female, she was young and blonde, working in a male-dominated government entity. So to compensate for what she felt was inadequacies because of that, she would never speak up, she wouldn't be authentic, she would miss opportunities and so on. And whatever she did say was so full of compensation and hiding that it wouldn't go over. She came to the course, we did some work, and I think she's in the book. Her story's in the book. And she went back and everything was changed. So a lot of it is not just...
So it wasn't the situation, but how she was handling it.
It's always that.
Her perspective.
It's the framing of it. It's the feelings we have that if we really show up in an authentic, genuine manner, we won't be good enough, something bad will happen, and so on.
But the opposite is true.
The opposite is true.
The strength is in showing up authentically.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But we've got to overcome decades and decades of thinking
Of
the
self-doubt.
opposite, of self-doubt and self-suppression and so on.
Right.
Where, so I don't think that because I was a man, it made it, it was, what I did notice and what you're talking to is because I was a male and working, if the women present had issues that were particularly gender-based, as this woman in a male-dominated industry, they could, I think, more easily push through with a male coach just because the issue was gender-based.
Right.
I think in that case...
I can see the value in that.
It did work, and I think in terms of my facility to coach women, I think the first thing they get is I am totally on their side.
Right.
I have their back, and I want to hear their cosmic roar.
Right.
That's what I'm up to.
Right.
I want them to become free from any pattern of self-suppression, fear, doubt, lack of confidence,
Right.
and just show up and show from a deep place who they are.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I have to say, I absolutely love that. I told you the story when we were
Yeah.
chatting last week
The first
about
woman that
the woman who came for a 2-day workshop. She gave 6 or 7 talks. God bless her. Nicole, she wouldn't mind my saying her name. All she did was cry.
Right.
She didn't say a single word in 2 days.
Yeah,
She
and I
stood-
like this story because I could imagine that there'd be people listening who would think, "Oh, that's what I would do if I had to stand up in front of a group of people
She
and
was
speak.
a
I would
beginning
cry."
speaker.
Yeah.
You know, of course, I work with skilled speakers and help them become more effective. But in this case, Nicole wanted to start doing her own business and couldn't. So she came and just stood, and I just said, just stand there, cry. Your victory is to stand and not sit down. For 2 days, all she did was cry. I kept giving her my handkerchief, you know.
Yeah.
A month later, I got a package from her. It was a nice new set of handkerchiefs. Today,
Yeah.
she gives workshops. She's a doula. She works with music to help work with pregnant women and so on. She does workshops. She speaks at conferences. She's got a
Unbelievable.
website. She does fantastic.
That's great.
So
Well,
the-
that's what I love is you help people walk through their fear.
They walk through their fear and they learn how to use the speaking instrument
Right.
to really impact the world in whatever way they want.
Right.
Which is really wonderful to find people, to work with people who can first access their deep truth and authentic being and then bring it out fearlessly, confidently, and I'll say skillfully.
Right.
And I do happen to agree with you when I look out at what's happening, let's just say, in this country. Come on, ladies.
Yeah,
we gotta have
time.
you. We gotta have.
Well, we need more women politicians, and
All
we
of
need
that.
more women CEOs in
We
every
need-
industry.
But you know,
more
it's not
women at
just
the
that. I
table.
just got an email from a woman I worked with in Australia, Kate, lovely lady. She's a mindfulness teacher. She came to a few workshops. We did some coaching years ago, and she just sent me this email again thanking me because when she first came, she didn't like speaking, and she didn't do much of it. She wrote to tell me that in the last couple of years alone, she's done scores of talks throughout Australia on mindfulness. She's led 10 retreats. She's published 4 books. She has meditation apps that have been heard by, I think she said, like 200,000 people. And she said, Robert, there are tens of thousands of people who are now practicing mindfulness through my work
Wow.
because of the work I did with you. Now,
Right.
please let me say this. I am not taking credit for that. I
But
will
you're
take,
bringing up the
I'll
point
take
of
some
how
credit
important.
for creating the space wherein people can rediscover what is innate within them and get my support to bring it out skillfully. But-
What I think you let people do, in like for her case, that
Yeah.
was a perfect example, is you help them to be able to deliver their calling or their life's
Yes.
purpose. Obviously, this woman's calling or life purpose is to deliver these meditations
It's
and
fantastic.
these talks that she couldn't have done if she hadn't overcome the fear. And that's what I fear is that
Yeah.
so many women have the fear of the public speaking. It's holding them back from doing what they're meant to be doing, and they have these
Yes.
gifts to give.
Absolutely.
Like we're here to be of service and to fill our calling. And if that one thing is holding you back,
Yeah.
well then by gosh, work on it. And that woman who cried for the first 6 times she did it is a perfect example of persistence. It's like, don't say I stood up, I cried, I'm done.
No,
like
she
keep
ended up
pushing through.
sponsoring 2 workshops for her community.
Yeah.
So and we're still in touch today. That's a little bit of an extreme case, but I mention it just because she had such a heart. It's such a resilient heart and a determination
Right.
to free herself.
Right. And that is what it is, a freedom, isn't it?
Oh my
Yeah.
God! Look, when I was in India, I was pursuing a kind of existential freedom, self-realization and all that. Who am I? But I'll tell you, until I started working in this speaking truthfully work and public speaking and finding for myself and then with others the freedom to stand up and show who you are.
There's nothing more powerful or
Well,
freeing.
look,
Yeah.
there's nothing like it as far as I've ever experienced so far.
Right.
And the irony is that capacity is actually an innate capacity that's been covered over by a lot of decisions and experiences and patterning and so on, which is really easy to undo.
Right. Well, I think the very culture makes people want to put up facades and not let people see their vulnerabilities.
That's right.
That's what made Brene Brown so popular.
Her
coming out
vulnerability talk, that's right.
Exactly.
In my world, I use the word connection a lot because to me, if we don't have connection, there's no communication. But connection specifically means, just as you said about Ms. Brown, intimacy with self, know yourself deeply, and then vulnerability with others. So you've got to first know yourself deeply, and then you open and show that to others. That's the connection, and because it is so visible and exposed, that's really what triggers all of the insecurities.
Right.
But people can overcome that if they come to my classes in 2 days, to be honest.
The thing about your, I think it's interesting that we haven't talked yet about the fact that you're a stage 4 cancer survivor for 5 years now, right?
Yep, so far so good.
Yeah, and that must have impacted you tremendously as to the work that you do in being present. And I remember you talking to me about this, about, you just cherish every day. Every day is a gift and a miracle. You are a miracle.
Thank you.
And so you obviously still have a lot to do here with your gift that you're giving to people to help them with the speaking and being their authentic self. And I think if there's anything I'd like to wrap up here about what I want people to get out of my conversation with you is there's a lot of people maybe who teach methods of speaking, delivery, presentation, how you stand.
Right. Toastmasters.
But
and so
I think the most important thing you and I talked about was is that being your authentic self.
Yes.
And that's not something that's always taught to people when they're speaking.
It's never taught because
Right.
they don't know. They teach a sort of behavioral modification and strategies and techniques, but they don't free you from fear, from lack of confidence. They don't free you to bring forth that level of authenticity.
Right. And who wouldn't rather be listening to someone that's speaking from an authentic perspective? I mean, you hear a lot of speakers, but the ones you really remember, because they say it's not what somebody says, it's the way they make you feel.
Yes.
And so how are you going to make someone feel unless you're sharing in an authentic way?
Absolutely. And making an authentic connection.
Right.
Which to me is really important.
Well, I think the work that you're doing is really important.
Thank you.
Where can people find out about your book and your website?
Miraculously, I have a website, robertrabbin.com.
Right, and that's Rabbin for those just listening, but it is on the screen.
That's right. Thank you.
And
And send me I live in LA, of course. Here we are together.
Right.
Happy to meet anyone. I work virtually, happy to travel, do private coaching, master classes. I'm saying that because I'm a little excited myself to get back out there. I have been a little bit sidetracked.
Well, you've been healing.
I've been sidetracked with a couple of things,
Yeah.
as you mentioned.
Right.
And I was recently released, my experience of my illness, I was recently released from that. It's like, okay,
To
son.
go do more beautiful
Go
work.
do this. And I love it.
Yeah.
I love seeing the transformation. I love the freedom that people have, that they claim. So I have mouth, will travel. Ready to go.
Right. And I think what you're doing is beautiful.
Thank you
and
very much.
You have a gift, and thank you for sharing it with so many people
My
and
pleasure.
changing so many lives by helping them with speaking.
Thank you. My
So
pleasure.
keep doing the wonderful
I
work.
am 100% will do that. Thank
Awesome.
you, Catherine. Thank you.
All right, and we will be right back next week at the same time, Wednesday at noon, here on UBN. So be sure to tune in and visit us on Facebook, 360 Karma Women. Make it a great week. Hugs and happiness.
The Live, Love, Thrive program is brought to you in part by Honda of downtown Los Angeles, supporting the equality and empowerment of women. The Live, Love, Thrive radio show is produced by 360karma.com. Are you a 360 Karma woman? If so, spread the word. Be sure to follow us on social media at 360 Karma Women on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please like us and share us with family and friends. This is the year of the woman, and we are stronger together.